Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Sustainable Fashion Show. This event is entitled Sustainable Fashion for All, examining the industry through the lens of social justice. Please note that this event is being recorded and it will be available to the public after the event. This fashion show and discussion will serve as a platform where the voices of civil society can coincide with the sustainable interests of the fashion industry. We will discuss possible mitigation strategies that both private and public sectors can implement in ensuring sustainable future with the future of the industry, within the future of the industry. This event will feature sustainable fashion designers and experts in fashion, sustainability, labor, consumerism, and supply chain, and forefront of sustainable and culturally diverse clothing and ethical consumerism. I would like to thank the co-organizers of this event. They are the United Nations Department of Global Communications, the Unitarian Universalist Association, Fashion Revolution, Fordham University, and the United Nations Association of New York. And to everyone involved in making this event, thank you so very much. Our moderator today is Jeff Texler. He's an attorney and professor of fashion ethics, sustainability, and development fashion law at the Fashion Law Institute at Fordham University. Please welcome Jeff Texler.
Hello, everyone. It's so good to see you. And I know I recognize a number of you that we've met over the years. It's fantastic to be here. This is an important meeting. Sustainability in fashion is one of the top issues of our day. And I look forward to hearing the insights of our speakers. We have amazing designers, brands, experts, representatives of civil society. It's going to be a fantastic event. But, you know, one of the wonderful things about the fashion industry is that fashion is something that we all have a personal connection to. We all wear clothes. And the industry is something that is very accessible to all of us. So there's a tremendous number of opportunities for people to make a difference to help fashion and the fashion industry get even better. And to start our discussion, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, who is Ayesha Barenblat, the founder of Remake.
Hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here. My name is Ayesha Barenblat, and I am the founder and CEO of Remake. We are a civil society organization whose mission is to make fashion a force for good. I am someone who has worked for the last 15 years, really focused on the social justice, the rights and dignity of the women who make our clothes. And having worked on the inside of the industry for many years, I founded Remake because I wanted to find an actionable way for all of you as everyday citizens, as Jeff said, as everyday shoppers, people who wear clothes, to have an understanding and actionable ways to make the industry better. I sincerely believe that citizen voice, standing in solidarity with workers, is really going to move this industry. Too often we talk about sustainable fashion without the rights and dignity of the people who make our clothes. And I really do want us to think that there is no sustainable fashion without social justice. And so for my time today, I wanted to share 3 very short stories with you. The first is a rather difficult story. It's the story of what happened to fashion during the pandemic. You know, in February of 2020, all of our lives changed. The world entered lockdown. Many of us were sheltering in place at home. Retail stores were shuttered, and the fashion industry panicked. What the industry did was go on to cancel upward of $40 billion worth of goods. I think it's important to understand that most of these goods were already produced. They were already in ships heading to Europe and the United States. Some of them had already arrived on shore. And so when factories woke up, what they saw in their inboxes was email after email of orders being canceled. Because this industry largely operates on debt, the impact on workers who are predominantly Black and Brown women who operate in fashion supply chain was swift and devastating. Millions of garment workers were furloughed or fired without pay. Often, many of them have no savings and live paycheck to paycheck. So essentially, this catastrophic decision by the fashion industry sent garment workers into the gravest economic crisis of our lifetime. Millions of garment workers very quickly started to report hunger as well as housing insecurity. I think this story really teaches us how supply chains are today set up to really exploit our Earth's natural resources, exploit the very people who enrich shareholders. The pandemic, in many ways, has cracked wide open the asymmetry of power. Because 1 year later, here we are in February 2021, of when this story started, and most of the fashion brands have roared back to life from a profitability standpoint. There are brands such as Primark and Nike and H&M who at this point are making pre-pandemic profit levels. There are others like ASOS and Lululemon and Amazon who are doing better than they did before the pandemic. If you are a numbers person, 20 of the most profitable fashion brands grew their market cap by 11%. Meanwhile, the average worker's wages declined by 21%. And so therein really lies the dichotomy. The average fashion CEO makes take home pay is around $8 million. The average garment worker, they saw in the pandemic their wages fall from $187 a month to $147 a month. It really doesn't have to be this way. The fact that pregnant women were fired, the fact that women were reporting skipping their meals, pulling their children out of school, having one meal instead of two, workers being on short term contracts because factories were in a liquidity crunch. Which brings me to my second story, which is a lot more hopeful. It's a story of hope at a time when a lot of us felt a lot of darkness. In March of 2020, we all, as a civil society coalition, the Pay Up Fashion Coalition, galvanized to stand in solidarity with union leaders and workers around the world. At that time, when we were all sitting on our Zoom screens and holding up homemade signs saying, pay up, the industry must pay up, we didn't know that this tinderbox, we would be igniting a global movement that would ricochet around the world, that would go viral, and it would really cause the type of reputational damage to brands to come to the table and do what's right. This was not about charity, but it was simply about good business practice. As of December 2020, the Pay Up campaign, through relentless protesting and petitioning, through citizen and worker solidarity, have recouped, by academic estimates, half of that stolen money, upwards of $20 billion in canceled orders from 25 of some of the largest fashion industry brands, iconic brands, Zara, Gap, Next. And I would say that it was the help of Pay Up, which is how millions of workers who were then brought back, who were able to make payroll through the difficult summer months. It was because of everyday people like all of us standing in solidarity while garment workers were out there on the streets protesting for what was legally owed to them, untold hundreds of hours that they had already worked in sewing this product. And we got some of that money back. But the hope in the story is also to say that the work of us as citizens, as civil society, is not done. In many ways, it has only just begun. even though we were able to get a lot of companies to do what's right, here we are a year later, and suppliers are again reporting retroactive price discounts. Some are telling us that in order to just keep the factories going, they are making product not just at a discount, but essentially for free, just to retain the business relationship. Um, we are also hearing on an average, fashion brands take 60, 90 to 120 days to pay back for orders. So the entire industry really operates on debt. Now we're hearing from suppliers upwards of 4, 6, 13 months, with the industry really hedging its bets to say, as we start to open up, as vaccines come along, should stores open, should sales pick up, that's when we'll pay you. And so we are in for a long fight, which is why our coalition of civil society actors working with union leaders, garment workers themselves have authored this blueprint. You can check it out at payupfashion.com. It is really focused on what the industry needs to do to build back better. To truly center workers and to assure that the industry is no longer focused on voluntary commitments, that we are not focusing on sustainability from a brand-centric viewpoint, but instead with a real focus on living wages, on transparency, and ultimately better regulation and policy reform. And so my final story to share with you all is a story of all of us. It's a story of galvanizing and taking action. If what you hear today moves you to say the clothes on my back don't represent my value system, I want to be a part of the solution. Here are three very concrete ideas of what you can do today. The first is, I saw in the poll, there's a lot of students here, although we have people of all age groups, become a Remake ambassador. We are a global movement of people who care about climate justice and worker rights in the fashion industry. We're building a coalition of citizen activists, sustainable business leaders, civil society organization who is here to say the fashion industry must be more just, more sustainable, and more accountable. This $2.6 trillion industry is vastly deregulated. So join us. We are a 700 strong community. We arm you with our investigative reporting, with our Made in documentary series. We hold educational workshops on college campuses. And so if you want to become a Remake ambassador, check us out at remake.world. That's one. The second is where your values. You know, every single day we make a decision with our wallet on how we want to further environmental impact and labor rights. As a watchdog NGO, we offer our seal of approval to businesses that truly meet our standard. We look at public disclosure to understand who are the brands, who are the fashion brands that are actually doing more good rather than less harm. It's very confusing for customers out there to find which brands really meet our value system. And so the next time you're buying something, whether for the summer or the Christmas break, if you are wondering who are the more transparent fashion leaders, again, visit our site, remake.world, and really use your wallet on our platform to shop with the better brands. Know that as a civil society, we take no money from the fashion industry. As a watchdog, we're just here to make the shopping process easier. And third, finally, use your voice. I say this to students around the world. I think for too long, we have this belief that somehow our shopping cart is going to make a bigger difference than us being engaged in the political process. The truth is, it doesn't matter how many sustainable brands we uplift. We're going to hear from some incredible designers today. We must, of course, spend our hard-earned money with them. But the way for us to truly make a difference is for us to be thinking of ourselves as citizens and not consumers. Because the only way, when 90% of the fashion industry's profits are controlled by 20% of the high street fashion brands, is for us to be fighting for minimum wage, whether for workers in Leicester or Los Angeles, there is, or globally, and to hold the industry accountable. And so you can follow us on our Instagram, Remake Our World. Our campaigning information is there, but really this is the time. I think the pandemic has shown us that the only way forward and the only way for us to be dealing with the environmental degradation, the human rights violations that really have been par of the course when it comes to the industry for us to come into our advocacy roots. There is a host of regulation that is being talked about, better contracts for the industry. The time for us to sit together in roundtables and talk is done. It's more about action rather than words. And so I thank you so very much for taking a few minutes to listen to me. I'm really eager for the questions and to engage in dialogue with all of you. And I will now turn it back to our wonderful moderator. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ayesha, for that important message. You know, somebody who works in law, I have to say the payments issue is one of the most pressing of our time. And I got to thank you for raising that and for all the work that you're doing to help the people who are the unpaid. It's incredibly important. My own background coming into fashion was from the civil society and social entrepreneurship space. I did a lot of work in social enterprise. And so it's my privilege to introduce you to a video on the social enterprise from Jakarta, Sukacita.
Sukacita has never been about fashion. We don't do seasons, we're not fast. We're here because we see a need for change, and we want to invite you to be part of it. You see, the thing is, I'm not a designer. As a development consultant, I returned to Indonesia to create impact. But beyond all the boardroom meetings and reports, it didn't feel like what I was doing was making any difference. So in 2015, I started doing my own research. Going village to village, it was the first time I saw what goes behind some of the things we use every day. Women making clothes with their hands. Skills and tradition passed down mothers to daughters. It's beautiful, but I couldn't help but notice they're struggling. I had to realize that behind a simple choice like what we wear every day are women who we'll never meet, hands we'll never see, and struggle we'll never know because of an unfair system. And my heart was broken. Craft is not just about pretty things. It really matters because it provides work for millions of men and women working from home. The thing is, the industry practice is really dirty. Environmentally, because of thousands of tons of toxic dyes entering our waterways each year. Socially, because only a small group of middlemen and workshop owners make all the profits. The problem is that for people like you and me, we just don't know. Sukacita was created to change that. A bridge to bring you and the artisans closer. That's why we work directly with villagers, not factories. Because this is where most of our artisans live and work. Yet, without any access, they often live a life of poverty. So through continuous trainings, we give them the tools to change their own lives. From business skills to environmentally friendly practices and quality management. It takes time, but for us, it's the only way. Started with only 3 women, we now empower more than 100 artisans. With our craft schools, we want to reach 1,000 more over the next 5 years. Made Right is our transparency standard. It's a promise that everything we make pays a living wage, is kind to the earth, and uses heritage craft. Every time you choose Made Right, you contribute to end pollution and exploitation. You know exactly where and who made your clothes and the impact it had on someone's life. Sukacita means happiness in Indonesian. It embodies our mission to return pride to those who have been invisible for too long.
As that speech highlights, the people who make our fashion are at the center of social reform movements. In fact, they have been at the center of social reform since at least the mid-19th century. So it's my honor to introduce our next speaker, Tara Rangarajan from the International Labor Organization. We'll talk about their efforts.
For that. I was just starting by saying thank you so much for having me here today. It's really a pleasure to be in this forum. Always an honor to speak after Ayesha, and certainly a very moving film that we were able to watch that tells the story from the ground. It's also motivating to see so many young people in particular here today. It's essential that all of us, whether we're in the fashion industry or just like to be fashionable, know how and where our clothes are made. I actually first started in the field myself as a master's degree student a few years ago, studying corporate responsibility in the apparel sector. For my thesis, I traveled with a group of other students to El Salvador, where we worked with factory workers to develop a methodology for how to calculate a living wage for our factory workers. My passion for ensuring good working conditions for the women and men who make our clothes has only gotten stronger in the 20 years since that first trip. I now work at an organization called the International Labor Organization, or the ILO. For those of you who don't know it, the ILO was established in 1919 as the only tripartite organization of the United Nations, which means we bring together governments, employers, and workers of our 187 member states, each with an equal voice at the table. The ILO sets international standards, and we develop policies and programs to promote decent work. In other words, we help countries write and enforce their labor laws, and we bring workers and employers together for dialogue on labor-related issues in countries around the world. At the core of our mission is a dedication to promoting justice and peace, social justice and peace, which are also at the heart of today's event. We have seen that the speed of globalization and including in apparel value chains has often led to increased inequalities and vulnerability. The mandate of the ILO is to ensure that workers have access to their fair share of the wealth that they have helped to generate. The largest ILO program that focuses on the apparel sector is Better Work, where I personally have been for about 10 years. I started in Vietnam, then I moved to Thailand, and now I'm at the headquarters in Geneva. Throughout my journey at Better Work, I've been lucky enough to get to know so many of the workers and the factory managers who are responsible for producing the clothes we wear. The apparel industry plays an essential role in the economic growth for so many countries around the world. Countries like Bangladesh, Cambodia, Vietnam, Haiti, Pakistan, Nicaragua. In many of these countries, the apparel sector is the largest part of the formal economy. A job in a clothing factory is often the first opportunity for young women to enter the formal workforce and to start to create financial independence, allowing her to provide for her family's education and healthcare. We also find that with the right investment and training, women start to develop financial literacy, and they gain the skills to speak up for themselves at work, but also at home. What we do at Better Work is to ensure that the conditions in these factories meet international labor standards and national labor laws. For instance, we ensure that there isn't forced labor or child labor at factories, that the workplace is safe, the workers get paid adequate wages, and they don't work excessive hours. We have found that when workers have a strong voice in their factory, in particular through representative unions, conditions do improve. We have also found that when women are properly represented, conditions are likely to improve even more. Yet, as we heard from Ayesha and in the film we just watched, we also know that the apparel industry continues to employ workers in extremely vulnerable positions. The COVID-19 crisis hit the garment sector particularly hard, affecting thousands of enterprises and millions of workers. The pandemic has exposed the stark inequalities between and within countries, hitting the most disadvantaged and the vulnerable workers the most, including those in the garment sector. In regions such as Asia, the apparel sector employs an estimated 65 million workers. In some cases, imports from Asia garment producing countries to major buying countries dropped on a monthly basis by as much as 70% in 2022 compared to the year before. As Ayesha mentioned, the cancellations of buyers' orders were common. According to ILO data, thousands of factories closed temporarily, some of them indefinitely. Worker layoffs and dismissals were widespread. Factories that have since reopened have seen reductions in their workforce. The impact varies country by country, of course, but based on countries for which there is data, the ILO estimates that the typical worker lost out on at least 2 to 4 weeks of work, and in many cases, income. In factories that reopened, only 3 in 5 workers were called back to the factory. Decline in earnings and in delays in wage payments were also common. Overall, data isn't forthcoming and estimates are hard to confirm, but we know that the picture is bleak. Women have been particularly hard hit. More than half of apparel workers around the world are women. In fact, more than 5% of all working women have a job in the garment sector. There is a significant risk that existing inequalities between women and men will be exacerbated by this crisis, and that some of the progress achieved over recent years in gender equality will be reversed, and women may be forced to consider more precarious work. In most garment producing countries, there is also little to no public protection for workers. This means that workers can't fall back on unemployment benefits if they don't have unemployment injury insurance, if they do get COVID, they don't have access to proper medical benefits, not to mention any sort of pension. This is the issue for us to address. We have to ensure that we are contributing to stronger and more institutionalized protections in the countries that are making the clothes that we depend on. At Better Work, we have roughly 250 staff around the work who have entirely revamped their work over the past year to ensure they are helping to protect workers during the crisis. We have launched massive worker engagement programs to ensure workers aren't isolated and can report problems, large-scale campaigns around health and safety at work, and we've been bringing all of the stakeholders together in all of the countries where we work to design a recovery path for their country. There is a momentum to use this major disruption to the industry as a way to challenge the status quo and build back better, a more resilient, inclusive, sustainable, and equal garment industry. This reconfiguration of the industry will likely build and accelerate existing trends and transformations, such as technological innovation and changes in geographies of production. A more sustainable reconfiguration of the industry can only be achieved through collective solutions for a human-centered future of the industry. The ILO will continue to be at the center of bringing together workers, employers, and governments to define what this new normal will entail. Again, thank you so much for having me today. You have the power as a collective to help create an apparel industry that looks different in the future. Use your voice to make sure that that happens.
Tara, thank you so much for your update on your important work with the ILO. Next, I'd like to have, we're going to take a look at another video, this time from Wasi Clothing.
Wasi Clothing is a Bolivian American run business based in Los Angeles. It is also a woman-owned business that is ethical and sustainable, but this brand was created to be made by BIPOC and for BIPOC and allies. It's a brand that was created because there needed to be more representation in the Bolivian American community, as well as representation and diversity within BIPOC, and also a safe place and a home for allies that support us. WASI's Fall 2020 collection is actually a really great example of how WASI runs. We used a lot of dead stock recycled fabric that we already had and produced new styles instead of tossing fabric away. We recycle this stuff and we do low production and low waste. So once a style is gone, it's gone. We don't overproduce, we don't create more, and we try to get rid of every last scrap. All the scraps that we also get from creating these new styles, we then create into accessories like scrunchies, headbands, masks, etc. So we try to take all of the waste and use it up as much as possible instead of what other typical fast fashion brands do and toss them away in landfills. We try to be as low production and as low waste as possible. This is a visual testament of how amazing, groundbreaking, and beautiful ethical and sustainable fashion can be for the industry. As you see right here, I am working closely with my team on puzzling pieces together on limited recycled Bolivian textile fabrics that we decided to make into beautiful garments. Not only are we being sustainable and recycling fabrics that were just lying around, but we created new designs that are not only ethically and sustainably made, but they are representative and diverse of a culture that is so often forgotten within the industry. So this is what the future holds for us. We can create diverse and representative designs that showcase a community that wants to be seen, while also paying the garment workers fairly and ethically, and also being sustainable and helping Mother Earth in the process.
So good to see you all again, and thanks again for that video. Next up, one of the things that we've been talking about throughout this entire event is that fashion gives an opportunity for all of us to make a difference, to all of us to have a worldwide impact. And here to talk about how you can play a role in promoting global change in fashion is Cyril Niker, who also have a very special interview.
Thank you, Jeff. I'm sure that you will agree with me that Africa is so relevant right now, with Teva Magugu winning the LVMH Hennessy Louis Vuitton Prize in 2019 and Sindisa Kamala being a finalist for the prize in 2020. African designers showcasing at New York Fashion Week and many other designers from the African continent have done amazing things on the global fashion scene recently. But what if the international industry has grown tired of the usual big four, Paris, Milan, London, and New York, and they want something new? Can it be found in Africa? Africa, with its burst of color, rich textures, and beautiful fabric, has long been a source of inspiration for designers from the Northern Hemisphere. Many have come in search of basket weaving techniques. Some have found how to learn how to print and match textures together. Could it be that these designers came for something and leave with so much more? Could it be a sense of identity? Discovering that although the continent of Africa is a developing continent with political uncertainty, its people hold the key to understanding that what brings about a sense of belonging. Could it be that many fabrics printed in Africa, which tell amazing stories, stories about identity and belonging, offer solace at a time when the world is at unrest and people are searching for meaning? Not only are designers looking for us for inspiration, many international fashion brands have opened stores in Africa looking to grow their markets. But has this come at a great cost? Good morning to you in New York. Good afternoon to my friends in South Africa. My name is Cyril Naiker. I am the country coordinator for Fashion Revolution South Africa. I believe that we are all placed on this earth with gifts and talents inside of us, and it's up to us to find these and to use them for good. I studied design just over 2 decades ago, and like any emerging designer, my dreams were huge. I did not think that I would end up working in activism, but I'm glad I did, as it is my purpose. It was a trip to India in 2004 that would change the path of my career. I happened to get lost in a clothing district in Delhi, and what I saw is what I call the ugly side of fashion. I think in life, when you don't know what is happening, it's okay to say it's ignorance, but when you see the working conditions, you cannot unsee it, and you cannot blame that on ignorance. To achieve the change in the fashion industry, leave alone the global fashion industry, it begins with me. As an individual, I am responsible. I must take ownership. Once I know better, I must do better, and then cultivate this culture among my peers. It is Nelson Mandela who poignantly said, as long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest. We must reflect and re-examine how we do business. The speed of the industry is simply unsustainable. COVID has given us and our planet a pause moment. We can't go back to business as usual. We must do better. The fashion industry is unbalanced. Systemic racism is a conversation that needs to happen. We need more inclusion. Our value system comes down to how we spend our money. This is actually how we vote. The fashion system is flawed. Factory disasters can be avoided. And this is actually the sad reality. It is time for reflection. So what can we do differently? There are amazing organizations around the world holding the fashion industry accountable for their actions. Some of them are on our panel today. I am representing Fashion Revolution, so allow me to tell you a little bit of who we are. We are people from all around the world. We are the people who wear the clothes, and we are the people who make them. We are designers, academics, writers, business leaders, policymakers, brands, retailers, marketers, producers, makers, workers, and fashion lovers. We are the industry, and we are the public. We are in 92 countries worldwide, with Venezuela, Estonia, and Sweden having joined recently. We believe in a fashion industry that values people, the environment, creativity, and profit in equal measure. We want to unite people and organizations to work together towards radically changing the way our clothes are sourced, produced, and consumed, so that our clothing is made safe, clean, and in a fair way. We believe that collaborating across the value chain, from farmer to consumer, is the only way to transform the industry. Our need for overconsumption gave rise to fast fashion, but how did this come about, and what has been the impact of fast fashion? Trade barriers softened, which created financial incentives for brands to move their production overseas. This created the trend for cheaper clothes, resulting in cheaper labor. This gave rise to fast fashion. Marketing played a role. and we as consumers bought more clothing. A closet full of clothes, but nothing to wear. Sound familiar? From a capitalistic perspective, Bangladesh is one of the world's fastest growing economies. The reality is the system does collapse. In 2013, the Rana Plaza factory collapsed, killing over 1,000 people and injuring thousands more. These were the people who make the clothes we wear every day. Can you imagine being a worker in this factory? A fire breaks out, you cannot even get out except trample on others. This is what happened at Rana Plaza. This was modern day slavery in the name of fashion. We need a revolutionary shift in our relationships with each other, with our clothes, within the fashion supply chain, for our own prosperity and well-being, and for the health of our earth, rivers, and oceans. Fashion Revolution Week this year, we are bringing people together from across communities, amplifying unheard and marginalized voices, and working together to explore innovative and interconnected solutions. We will be sharing the stories of those affected by change with those who are asking change to pressure those who need to change. Our conversations, webinars, stories, and worker profiles will come together to introduce a new dominant cultural narrative based on a just transition, where transparency, respecting human rights and dignity, and conserving the environment become a driving force for the public and for the fashion industry. We plan to be part of a future-focused global fashion industry that conserves and restores the environment and values people and planet over growth and profit. In summary, Fashion Revolution 2021 will amplify unheard voices, those of the supply chain producers, workers, and communities affected by the fashion industry, giving them more visibility and providing a platform for their stories. Widen community participation, mobilizing people and their communities around the world to speak up, to come together and take action to create the systemic change that is urgently and desperately needed across the fashion industry. A consumer study shows that 91% of millennial consumers are willing to give ethical brands a try or even change their brand loyalty if price and sustainability are comparable. Where there's demand, supply will be created. Get involved, find brands that you can trust. If you care about the environment, if you care about climate change, if you care about poverty alleviation, if you care about empowerment, I encourage you to look no further than the clothes that you wear. Please sign the manifesto at fashionrevolution.org, show your clothing label and ask the brands who made my clothes. Think about the clothes and shoes that you're wearing right now. Do you know who made them? Do you know what the person was paid? Do you know which country your clothes were made in? The country listed on the side label of the seam will tell you which country the pieces were stitched together, but it won't tell you where the cotton was farmed, where the fiber was spun into yarn, and where the yarn was woven into fabric, where it was dyed and where it was printed. This fragmented supply chain is common in the fashion industry, and this is why we need transparency from major brands and retailers. When we ask who made my clothes, we are asking about every person involved in the journey, from fiber to the garment. Thank you to all the sponsors that made today's panel discussion possible. I would also like to thank LMDA World for sponsoring the video that you're about to watch, as well as Abigail Thompson, Sindisa Kumalo, Simendra Chetty, and Merchants on Long. These discussions are important, but more importantly, it must be followed by action. Now is the time for a fashion revolution. Thank you. Sindisa, I'm really excited to be chatting to you, and we are both from KwaZulu-Natal, and I know that you're quite involved with ethical fashion. How did that come about?
My grandmother was a pattern cutter and worked in a factory. The idea of labor and the idea of fairness in labor has been something that's always been instilled in me and something that I've always just been aware of. And when I first started my practice, I actually used to work with NGOs in Durban and try and figure out how I get the amazing crafts from where we were from and bring them into a contemporary fashion environment. Seeing the levels of poverty we have in South Africa, the levels of unjust fairness of how workers are treated. If you see those things happening, it does kind of inspire you to kind of want to make that change.
You work with an NGO in Cape Town called Embrace Dignity. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So Embrace Dignity is an NGO based out of Cape Town that works with women who've been either previously in like sex work or like have been trafficked and basically in highly exploitative environments. And they basically work in rehabilitating them and bringing them out into a non-exploitative work environment. We work with them by getting in recruits into our business. We have a paid apprenticeship where we teach the girls and the women embroidery, sewing, but also just like the business of fashion and how this industry works.
It's really about connecting people. And if I think about connecting people, I know that you work with artisans in Burkina Faso. What was that experience like in terms of finding the right artisans, and why create your own textiles?
So I am a textile designer, so I've always been really, really fascinated about African textiles and African craftsmanship. Many of the textile heritages that we have been passed on over generations. And if you look at the textiles that are produced in West Africa, they'll be so different to textiles, say, produced in Southern Africa. One of my good friends, Mary Jo, she started her own textile workshop in Burkina Faso, and so that was a very kind of easy alignment for us to work and develop these beautiful textiles from scratch, but also knowing that because of the work we do, we're also able to empower whole communities from the textiles. Because for me, sustainability is not just about the environment or ethical making, it's also about ensuring that things get passed on over generations and it doesn't just end with a generation. So for me, that was also such a big part of working with these artisans.
Sustainable fashion for all, examining the industry through the lens of social justice. I know that you're inspired by your heritage, specifically your mom, and the role she played in terms of activism, specifically with the apartheid regime in South Africa. But more than that, you're also inspired by activists in your work. So through the lens of social justice, how do you actually communicate this in your clothing?
The idea of fairness is really important to me. And especially when we live in the world that we live in today, I feel like less and less people are going to just take this, like the unfairness that exists and just kind of like brush over it. Harriet Tubman has been my muse for the last 2 seasons, and I'm inspired by her because here's this 5'2" Black woman who frees 70 slaves in her lifetime in the most oppressive, unfair regimes imaginable. And I think for me to tell those stories and to remind people that we can fight the unjust, that you can create your own fairness in your own fair environment, I think it's really inspiring.
Sindisa, you've been quoted in Vogue that you see your work as a healing agent that allows people who have been previously marginalized in society to have an opportunity to share their stories. Can you tell me a little bit about this healing agent?
I really do believe that textiles can really heal. I spoke to J.W. Anderson during the LVMH Prize, and he told me this really impactful story that in World War II, the soldiers, after they came back from the war, were actually engaged in needlework in order to try and deal with the post-traumatic stress of the war. I found that just quite a really interesting concept, that the idea of people sitting together and making slowly can actually just also take away a lot of the traumas that they've had. And it exists definitely within our practice, where we bring women together. Some of the women are asylum seekers. Some of the women have been involved in really terrible situations. I think people want to feel that they have the power to change their own destiny. It's not just about making work, but actually feeling empowered by the work that you're making.
A question that came to my mind is, you are so passionate about the continent of Africa, and I wanted to know, what would you like your legacy to be?
I would like to get as many women out of horribly oppressive environments and being able to empower as many women as possible on our continent, to have as many jobs possible for all the amazing, bright young minds that are out there looking for jobs, to just basically change the narrative of where their lives would be going.
Sandisa, fashion's often been referred to as just a frivolous industry, and I think just from our conversation, it's certainly not frivolous. It's been such a privilege for me to sit down and talk to you today, so thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Cyril.
Sumendra, it's really exciting to chat to you, and one of the reasons I'm excited is because I love this store. Not only do you support local designers from South Africa, but you basically support local designers on the continent of Africa. Where did that vision come from?
Well, Merchants on Long has always aimed to showcase the best in African design, whether that be clothing or accessories. Africa is so rich in its culture, heritage, and beauty, and it has such a massive global appeal. That is why it's important for us to act as a platform for these amazing creatives.
As a buyer, what do you look for specifically when choosing garments for the store?
I look for designers who are storytellers, who showcase a flair for design, who take you on a journey of culture, creativity, and most importantly, their business ethics, how they treat their staff.
That's amazing, because now we know as a consumer coming into your store and buying something that due diligence was done and that we have peace of mind knowing that the value chain was ticked off.
Exactly. It's a lot of work, but we aim to always be transparent in every step along the process.
Great. Thanks, Cyril, for all of that. That was really interesting, and it's great to see the sustainable fashion movement all around the globe. Our next speaker is going to talk about a very important issue. If you've been in sustainable fashion for long, you know that it's not always easy being green. So now we have Professor June Park to speak to us about some of the challenges and how to overcome some of the challenges to being a sustainable consumer.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you so much for having me. My name is June Park. I'm an assistant professor of fashion merchandising at Oklahoma State University. I'm a researcher who studies consumer behavior and clothing consumption. So today I'd like to talk about fast fashion and sustainable fashion consumption from a consumer's perspective. Specifically, I'll talk about why fashion consumers are more unsustainable. In other words, what makes it so hard to consume fashion sustainably? And then I will conclude with several suggestions based on research findings. Why are fashion consumers more unsustainable? Perhaps the most fundamental reason is that clothing are more than just a piece of fabric. It's a part of our desired identity. People use it to express who they are and who they hope to become. Clothing and fashion are such a powerful tool for people to use when constructing and reconstructing their identities. What I've been consistently discovering in the research on fashion consumption is that those people who buy from fast fashion are not necessarily those who don't care about the environment or not aware of the social issues that the fashion industry has. In fact, they are aware of the environmental issues and social justice issues, and some of them do apply their conscious consumption principles to contexts like their food consumption, their energy consumption, and maybe recycling and etc. But these same consumers often disregard sustainability in their fashion consumption decisions. So why? Again, because of this inherent nature of fashion, the desire to express our identity and be trendy have become often more important than other desires or concerns, like to support the environment or help others. Another thing that makes sustainable and mindful consumption of fashion so difficult is that fast fashion brands offer just irresistible benefits, like low financial costs. We all know how cheap their products are. and low search cost, meaning that it's just so easy to find the exact style that we want, like yellow cropped sweaters or black turtleneck, sweaters, cardigans, with just a few searches and clicks, given a wide variety of assortments that these fast fashion brands provide. Unfortunately, these kind of strong benefits are not provided by any other retail stores, including secondhand retailers that are often positioned as a solution to the industry's sustainability problems. The brands that you see on this slide are called ultra fast fashion brands, which I consider the second generation of fast fashion. These brands are even cheaper and faster than those fast fashion brands that have been longer in the market, like H&M and Zara. For instance, while it takes about 5 weeks for Zara to get their design concept to stores for sale, it only takes 2 to 4 weeks for these brands to do the same thing. And their businesses are actually booming now. While H&M planned to close 250 stores globally over the pandemic, Boohoo's sale rose by 45% between February and August in 2020, just amid the pandemic. In my opinion, fast fashion brands will never disappear, and they are actually getting smarter and smarter with new technologies like artificial intelligence and social media in enticing consumers, creating the desire, and satisfying the demand. Another factor that makes sustainable fashion consumption more challenging is this greenwashing. We all know those buzzwords like sustainable, obviously, and transparent or conscious. Those kind of words are being so much overused in many fashion brands' marketing communication. In fact, when I teach fashion retailing class and have my students to create the business plan for sustainable fashion brands, more than half of students come up with this idea of take back approach to ask their customers to bring unwanted clothes for credits. To buy another new piece of clothes. So then I have to ask if students really know what happens to those collected clothes. And I find that most of students don't know exactly what happens to those collected clothes. They just believe that, well, those clothes will be, somehow used in a good way to support the environment. Well, H&M's garments recycling program urges their consumers, their customers, to bring just whatever clothes that they no longer want. And their promotion video is closed with this message: we will make sure they get a new life. But then it doesn't tell us what that new life really means. According to the CBC report, about 35% of what H&M collects is recycled, but to make products like rags or insulation. So obviously it's not like a nice clothes. In case you didn't know, less than 1% of clothing can be actually recycled to make another clothes. That means majority of clothes, like more than 99% of clothes, are recycled, but into, I would say, like inferior quality of products like carpet, paddings, or rags. But anyway, the rest of 35% of clothes that H&M collects ends up in the secondhand clothing markets, often in Africa and some of those other developing nations. But over 80% of clothes sent to the secondhand market overseas actually ends up in the landfills, because those clothes are not sold to consumers in those developing countries either. So the new life promised in the H&M's campaign is clearly false and very much misleading. Well, we have numerous other examples of these greenwashing claims, but given the time, I'm going to have to move on. But if you know more about this, please email me, then I would be happy to share more information about these and other examples. So then what can consumers do? I'd like to propose several practical guidelines and frameworks. First off, keep in mind that sustainability is not about buying another piece of sustainable collection or replacing all the clothes that you already have in your closet with all those nice clothes from sustainable fashion brands. It's more about your mindset pertaining to attitudes, values, and expectations surrounding your behavior. it is a conscious sense of caring for yourself, caring for community, and caring for nature. One of the questions that I'm frequently asked from students is, what brands are truly sustainable that we can really trust? Well, it's really hard to answer that kind of question because in my opinion, no brands are sufficiently clean to buy without feeling any guilty. So perhaps a much better way to approach this sustainable fashion consumption would be buy less and love what you already have. It's completely fine that the clothes that you already have are from some of those fast fashion clothes. Take good care of them and wear them as long as you can. And instead of going and finding another new piece of clothes. Accumulative and repetitive consumption can never make you practice sustainable consumption. Second, knowledge matters. So as you've seen, so in those greenwashing examples, unless we study, learn, and research, it's really hard. There's almost no way for average consumers to discern what those numerous sustainability claims that are made by those big companies. I think this highlights the importance of consumer education and research, which is also part of my job, and this event that we are all participating now. Third, buy good quality products. This is not only the consumer rights that we all should enjoy, but also just a great way to practice sustainable consumption. Have you ever thought about economic sustainability? One dimension of that triple bottom line of sustainability as a economic well-being of consumers. So it's not just about like a company's bottom line of their profit and loss statement. So when you buy quality products that are worth your hard-earned money and enjoy wearing it for a longer time, you indeed practice very sustainable consumption. Then how do we know the quality of products that we buy? Well, just turn the clothes inside out and check the seams and stitches. In many of fast fashion clothes, you might have seen that the seams are already coming apart before you even try on. Elizabeth Klein, the author of the book Overdressed, stated that at prices that circle around $20, we know the product is not good quality. Instead of the quality is good enough for the price that we pay. So my conclusion here would be, please don't buy your clothes because the quality is good enough. Know your consumer rights and buy good quality products. Thank you.
Okay. Professor Park, thanks so much for that informative survey of the sustainable fashion landscape. Thanks, that was really informative. Information is key to moving forward. So in that spirit, we'd just like to take a second to bring to you another poll. I see the first question is about which topics you would like our panelists to discuss further. And then after you're done with the poll, I understand there's going to be another video, this time from Kasha. So I look forward to another video on sustainable fashion.
मेरा नाम अशद है। मेरा 2004 से डाइंग का काम।
मेरा नाम अर्चना जगताप है, मी कोंढवा से हूँ.
माझे नाव पार्वती, मी कोंढव्यामध्ये राहते.
माझं नाव वैशाली ओहाळ आहे. मी चंदननगरमध्ये राहते. माझं नाव सारिका वाघमोडे आहे. मी काशामध्ये कामाला आहे 3 वर्षापासून.
मेरा नाम मोहम्मद अफसान है. मैं यूपी से हूँ, लखनऊ. सिलाई का काम करते हैं.
मेरा नाम मोहम्मद एहसान है. मैं यूपी से हूँ, लखनऊ से. सिलाई का काम करते हैं.
मेरा नाम मोहम्मद कौनैन अंसारी, मैं यूपी से.
मेरा नाम मोहम्मद नसीम अंसारी है, मैं टेलर हूँ.
मेरा नाम पीर पाशा मुजावर है, मैं टेलर काम करता हूँ.
मेरा नाम नदीम अशरफ है, मैं लखनऊ से हूँ.
मेरा नाम मोहम्मद अहमद है अंसारी और मैं लखनऊ से हूँ.
मेरा नाम असदुल्लाह अंसारी.
मेरा नाम मसीहुद्दीन अंसारी है, हैंड एम्ब्रॉयडरी का काम करता हूँ.
मेरा नाम जुबैर अंसारी है.
मेरा नाम वकील अंसारी, मैं लखनऊ यूपी का रहने वाला हूँ.
Thanks so much for showing that. One thing that we see in all of the videos today is that, when I started working with sustainable fashion, one of the common misimpressions was that it was just all going to be, that people had, was that sustainable fashion was all drab. They're more concerned with the supply chain than they are with actually making clothing that people would wear. But I think our videos show today, there's a lot of beautiful clothing out there in the sustainable fashion space. That aesthetics do make a difference, and we have amazing designers. And we also have amazing speakers. And now let's move to some Q&A.
Zara and I are with the United Nations Association of New York. We're really pleased to be co-hosting this event today. I'd like to thank all of our panelists for their fascinating contributions. We'd like to pick your brains a little more. And our audience has indicated that they'd love to know more about the cost of sustainable practices in the supply chain. So we'd like to ask Ayesha and Tara, some unsustainable practices in garment factories allow businesses to employ people with limited opportunities and skills for work, with many employees willing to accept poor work conditions for increased job security. How could solutions be properly implemented to ensure both ethical practices and protecting their jobs?
Thank you so much for that question. I often, when we are out there talking about working conditions, this question often comes up, essentially pitting work with people's well-being, and this notion that in order to assure living wages, then the industry is just going to flee and go somewhere else. So we have to take sweatshops for what they are. And truly, it's a myth that the industry in itself has perpetuated. Professor Mark Anner over at Penn State University did some calculations when it comes to what would it cost to truly have living wages on a garment. And his calculation states it's 10 cents more. And so if you look at it from the way the industry operates and looking at FOB price and how razor thin the margins are, a lot of factories would balk at this question of, well, 10 cents more is too much for us when we are negotiating down to the last penny. But I think especially as we look to this pandemic and see how fashion brands, especially the large fashion houses, the high street brands, have done fine. There's cash on the books, the balance sheets are okay. It's to say it's not that the industry has to constantly operate in a sweatshop environment, but that it's the way to really perpetuate the inequity of, enriching shareholders at the cost of workers. And that the only way for us to be thinking about this is through living wages and passing regulation. What's fascinating is that a lot of companies talked about heading off to Ethiopia. I know Tara will have a perspective on that, couching it as the next sustainable frontier. But Ethiopia doesn't even have a minimum wage standard. And so this race to the bottom, at some point, it's going to be difficult for the ultra fast fashion industry on where are we going to go. And I think certainly with COVID-19, we've realized how important sustainability is when it comes to resilience as well, because with all the ruptures in the fashion supply chain, it's going to be very hard to get goods shipped on time, to be assuring quality. And so there are brands that are recognizing that this constantly pushing down to the last penny is really not a sustainable business model. But as Professor Park noted, the ultra fast fashion brands, Boohoo, Misguided, Fashion Nova are really winners when it comes to the pandemic. And they're the ones where the rock bottom wages have also had real implications from a COVID-19 perspective. All the hot spots for where the virus has taken hold have been in Leicester, UK, where Boohoo was operating till they now fled to Pakistan, and similarly with Fashion Nova in Los Angeles. And so there is currently a bill here in California, Senate Bill 62, that would push for minimum wages. And you would be surprised to realize that minimum wages are not even reinforced right here at home. So I think at the end of the day, what we need to recognize is that as we look at profitability, as we look at shareholder value, as we look at CEO pay, it is possible for the industry to pay living wages. It just so happens that thus far we haven't had the political will, and the lobbying arm of the industry is very strong to sort of perpetuate this myth that somehow if we pay more, then we're going to have to flee to a cheaper location. So that would be my perspective on the question, is we should just stop pitching lives and livelihood and talking somehow about, well, these are jobs, they're not good jobs, but we should just take them because that's our only option.
And I'll just add a couple of things to that, just to say that it's really decent work that leads to the type of improvements that I was talking about earlier. So when you talk about women being empowered, when you talk about women being able to provide financially for their families, for education, for healthcare, that's not any job. That's a decent job. That's a job where they're getting paid a decent wage, where they're able to work in safe conditions at proper hours. And so what we really need to do is make sure that that's not voluntary. We need to make sure that the laws in the countries where we produce are strong and that brands are insisting the laws are enforced. And it isn't a matter of as Ayesha said, profitability versus welfare of workers. But really, what we've also seen is that there's a very strong business case for treating workers well. That when workers are treated with respect and when the laws are followed, that workers stay at their factories longer, that they have less injury rates, that they have less absenteeism. So there is a way for profitability to accompany for a business to also accompany improved welfare of workers. And the last point that I would make is really the importance of ensuring that workers have a voice at the table and that workers can sit down with managers and raise their concerns and bargain collectively for improved conditions. And that is a cornerstone of what turns a job into a decent job and then provides the types of returns that are necessary for women who enter this industry to move up and to move forward with their lives. I would just mention also that there are increasing efforts in consumer countries, and notably the EU, for mandatory due diligence that actually will hold brands accountable for the practices of the companies throughout their supply chain. So we're seeing a real recognition increasingly in consumer markets as well to say voluntary initiatives that are overseen by brands is not going to cut it. We need to move to a more mandatory type of framework to ensure that there isn't the type of race to the bottom that Ayesha was referring to.
Thank you so much for your insights, Ayesha and Tara. And thank you for my intro, Carlo. Yes, my name is Zara, and I am on the communications team with UNA NYC, and I'm so happy to be with you guys today. So our second question that did very well, the question that did well in the poll was on cultural appropriation versus cultural representation. So this question is mainly directed to Cyril and really anybody else who wants to jump in and raise some points. So it asks, as the world becomes more integrated and proactive, fashion designers try to create inclusive designs and pay respect to different cultures. There exists a fine line between cultural appropriation and properly representing that culture. How can the average consumer understand this fine line without disrespecting the source of inspiration?
Hi, Zara. Thank you so much. This is obviously a huge area where also transparency is actually vital. I mean, we can trace the cultural material, how it has been used from start to finish, but it's not just crediting the community that it originates from, it's also the practices within. So of course, this is also a question of power and agency and systemic change, which basically is needed around culture, around the economy, and basically how design practices are needed. So it also is an idea of IP and ownership. And unfortunately, this is deeply embedded in the capitalistic system. So who has ownership? Because obviously it comes down to exploitation in terms of the economic values. So it could be a little bit difficult for the average consumer to understand the fine line in a very broad topic in terms of ownership and power being challenged. But I would say that the responsibility is actually on the designer. The designer who's doing it owes the responsibility to credit the source, to tell the story of where it comes from. And this is something we see in South Africa quite a lot. Simple example, we have just 11 official languages. So that can tell you 11 official language, how many different cultures we have in South Africa. And we often see designers from all over the world exploit. And I think this is something that needs to stop. And I think designers really have to do their due diligence and pay respect. And, it's more than just crediting the source. I would take it a step further. And I would say that if you are crediting the source, you've also got to say, am I putting money back into that community? So if it's a rural village and if it's people that are working on basic ends meet, how can you as a designer support this? And we've had huge brands that have exploited designers locally. And I'm sure it happens in other areas as well. So this is something, again, that comes back to transparency.
Thanks so much, Cyril. If nobody else wants to hop in, I think we have time for one more question, and it's a good one because it's for all four of you. So a lot of the audience is curious to know more about the role of the educated consumer. So the question for you all is, all of the panelists, all of you have discussed the role and responsibility of the educated or uneducated consumer in the apparel industry. Is this whole issue of sustainable fashion, is it ultimately an issue of access to information?
So my short answer to this would be no. It's not access to information. It's that we really don't have any standards when it comes to what a company markets to us. As Professor Park's wonderful presentation was teaching us, there's so much greenwashing out in the industry. Every couple of years, we find a silver bullet solution that's somehow going to address all the issues, whether we're talking about closed loop, recycling, sustainable fashion, what sustainable fashion even means. And I think it's quite hard for an average customer, especially when, as Cyril was saying, the fashion industry is so fragmented. There's such little trace and visibility. And so from our perspective, I really do think we should be thinking of ourselves more as concerned citizens rather than educated consumers. We're not going to consume our way into a sustainable fashion future. If we truly care about social justice in the fashion industry, then let's get this Senate Bill 62 right here in California passed. If you're in the UK, let's involve in the UK parliamentary inquiry around sweatshops in Leicester. If you're in Europe, look at the European Human Rights Due Diligence Act. And this really is about regulation. I actually have a lot of empathy for everyday consumers that are trying to live a perfect life, but when it comes to what you put in your cart, I think recognizing that there really are no truly sustainable brands, the best way to do this is to support the smaller brands, to buy less, buy better, but it really is about regulation at the end of the day, and for us to come into our citizen power rather than thinking of ourselves as consumers.
I think this also highlights the importance of our efforts to increase the availability of information so more and more people can be exposed to this information and maybe more educated. So not those people who participate in this kind of events, or not just those people who major in fashion and in related areas. So I think our fellow panelists have already shared multiple different ways that we all can be engaged in. So we all can do what we can do in our own, place. So we all can be different kinds of activists on our campus, activists, in our neighborhood, so that we can spread the words and we can educate our friends and our family members about, what we have learned. So again, the panel members here have been working for those great social movements and consumer campaigns, and communicating with the public regarding these issues. And I am mainly interacting and meeting with students on campus. So what I do, for example, I have tried to incorporate sustainability into my other classes, like apparel quality evaluation class or global sourcing class, so that students can have that sustainability framework and lens to understand, those different subject matters. So I think there must be a variety of initiatives and efforts, and those efforts can be just the small things that we all, can do with, our knowledge. And that way, I think we can target various groups of consumers so that they can be educated and they can be exposed to the information.
I can just add briefly to what's already been said. I think transparency of information does play a critical role. I just posted in the chat information that Better Work posts on the working conditions in the factories where we work. And what we've seen is that when this information goes on into the public, there is more pressure on brands and there is more pressure on factories to ensure that workers are, working conditions are being respected in the factories where we work. We do see an effect there, but I would also agree with the fact that the pressure won't come only from consumer action. Where the pressure is going to come is from people demanding that the countries where their clothes are made are countries where all factories are required to abide by laws that protect workers and give workers a path to a better future. It's not just about meeting basic minimum needs. It's about ensuring that workers are treated with respect and that they are able to save enough money to educate their children, to provide for healthcare for their children, and to lead a different and a better life for generations to come. So that's about supporting regulation, and it's about asking brands to care. It's about letting brands know that you care, not only with your purchases, but also by asking the right questions and making sure that they know that people are listening and watching.
Thanks for the question, Carlo. I would say that consumer education has always been a vital part of Fashion Revolution and about our movement. I would say that it's not just about the question, but it's about the access to information. How accessible is that information? And again, it's not just about the accessibility, but it's also about the language and the context and the culture and the format. So interpretation of the information is critical. And we know that there's also a lot of misinformation and also a lot of information dumping in the space, which is critical, which leads to misinterpretation, misinformation. So that is why Fashion Revolution's first mantra was be curious and find out. Those are the first two steps that we spoke about. And then we said do something. So it's always about self-education and self-led inquiry. And again, in my presentation, I spoke about it starts with me. So I think we owe it to ourselves. We live in an age of information. We have Google at our disposal. And I think, people are not sure about anything. They need to do the research themselves. They need to do the homework themselves. And you can't really blame it on any brand or any associate. You've got to know what they do. So I would say, yeah, I think we've got to take ownership there.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists for answering these questions, and thanks to all of you for voting on the questions and showing us what you've been thinking about on these issues. You know, there are a number of, as some of our panelists have said, there are different definitions of sustainability, but one thing that brings them all together, I think, as we saw, but even going back as far as the Brundtland definition, is that sustainability is a concern for today, but it's also thinking about the impact of what we're doing today on the future generations. So I think it's only appropriate now that we take a moment to listen to the youth voice.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lena Georgiadis. I'm a Thai American. I'm also a senior at SUNY New Paltz, studying international relations and Asian studies. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. I just want to thank the panel members and the designers within this show for their beautiful clothing and their very interactive dialogue and speech that is raising awareness on the reality of fast fashion. From a student perspective, I see that there is a dual agenda between not only integrating sustainable lifestyles within yourself and within your community, but also projecting that out to the government and to the private sector, so they also are aware that we are holding them accountable. We as civil society are holding them accountable and ensuring that garment workers and the environment aren't exploited. I think it's also important to show, as many of the panel members have, that the garment workers have very little economic and social mobility. And that is one of the main issues, is that, especially within the pandemic, being a garment worker, you have to decide how you're going to feed yourself or feed your family, and if you have to take your children out of school. And as Tara mentioned, just decent working conditions, decent wages, so that everybody within the supply chain, from the people making the clothes to the people wearing them, have an ability of economic and social mobility within this world, because that's a basic human rights that people should have. But I am very hopeful for the future, especially within my generation. I think that we can work together and, as I said, not just integrate sustainable climate change mitigation actions within our own lifestyles, but projecting that out to our governments and the private sector. So by using our purchasing power, by working with NGOs and raising our voices, and also pressuring our governments and the private sector to hold them accountable, to ensure that they are taking the necessary actions to mitigate climate change and to ensure that people aren't being exploited within the fast fashion industry and the fashion industry in general. And that's it. That's it for me. So thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. My name is Claire. I'm a junior at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. Thank you to all of the panelists and organizers. Your perspectives and experiences have been so impressive and inspiring to hear. So going into business school, of all things, I knew I wanted to shape my education around business and sustainability, specifically that intersection. So this led me to join clubs and organizations on campus that were focused on the positive impact that businesses can have. And in one of those clubs, I had the opportunity to be a part of a sustainable apparel project-focused team. So our project during my freshman year was focused on education and awareness on campus, which we approached through a dual in-person online educational campaign. We launched a social media platform that shared how sustainable brands, they highlighted commitments of established brands that were already doing more sustainable actions, and posted tutorials on how to fix the clothing that you already had in your closet. So meanwhile, in person, we would also host pop-up educational booths where we do very similar things, but teaching students in person how to fix buttons, repair holes in their clothes, apply patches, and just discuss. Okay, sorry, unmuted. And discuss how to shop more, more sustainably. So this project gave me an important understanding of not only the complexity of the fashion industry on really a firsthand level, but how people, especially college students, think about their purchases and take sustainability into account when they really do have the proper information. So building off of that prior knowledge, what our speakers have said, particularly the idea that there are no truly sustainable brands, referenced about the complicated responsibility that we have as consumers, it really resonated heavily with me and what I can do day to day. So I've been having consistent conversations with other students about the impact of their day-to-day actions, and seeing campus-wide conversation around sustainable apparel and fast fashion grow since my freshman year of college has not only inspired me to take further action in my own life to make more conscious purchases or lack of purchases, but to encourage my friends and family to discuss and share more information about the impact of their actions, and ultimately given me hope not just for consumers asking brands to care, but the next generation of designers, supply chain managers, and policymakers for transparency and sustainability. Thank you again to all of our panelists. I've really enjoyed hearing everything that you all have to say, and I'm excited to hear from Paul about his experiences as well.
Thank you, Claire. So my name is Balab Saha, and I'm currently a junior at the Ross School of Business as well at the University of Michigan. And as a Bengali American, it always irked me to see the Made in Bangladesh mark on the tags on the clothes I used to buy. And despite H&M and other fast fashion brands being popular in school and affordable clothing for my family, I would find myself feeling guilty after reading articles online about the numerous cases of poor working conditions and unfair treatment that factory workers experience on the daily. Bangladesh's garment industry is the second largest in the world after China, accounting for 84% of its export revenue. Yet sweatshops still exist, and COVID-19 only hurt garment workers even harder. Clothing is one of the most revered aspects of our culture, yet people continue to be treated poorly. So how unfair is that? Everyone loves shopping and trusts major retailers to ensure proper sourcing of the products they buy. However, we only ever see what is in front of us. By being at the tail end of the production process, average consumers never really know how the shirt they purchased was actually developed. But to whom does this duty of accountability really rest on? Should we really expect consumers to perform their due diligence and research every product they buy? Or should there be stricter expectations for businesses to inform the public? It was amazing to hear some of these questions actually being answered in the discussion today. So thank you again to all of the panelists. I feel honored to be a part of Generation Z and the immense level of activism that my peers display on a daily basis. I never would have even considered how much the clothing we wear contributes to our respective carbon footprints if it were not for the extensive resources that my friends and other activist groups constantly share on social media. However, the vast majority of the population lacks access to such information and continue being oblivious to their role in the greater scheme of the fashion industry. Just as our speakers have discussed today, we as civil society have a responsibility to continue raising awareness and holding fashion industry giants accountable for their actions. As Cyril mentioned before, we can't wait for another incident like the Rana Plaza fires to spark public outcry, but rather we must stay in front of it and continue hearing from experts like Ayesha, Professor Park, Cyril, and Tara. I know that I'll be taking a deep look into my own spending habits and how I purchase clothing in the future after this event. And I encourage you all to do the same. Change has to start somewhere, and now is the perfect time to jump on board. Thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to all the speakers once again.
And thanks to all of you for offering your perspectives. That was really important and valuable. I think this wraps up our session. So to close, I want to offer just a few thoughts and of course, some thanks. Thanks to our host today. Thanks to our speakers who are amazing and the designers and brands who are part of our video showcases. And of course, I want to thank our sponsors for making this possible. The United Nations Department of Global Communications, the Unitarian Universalist Association, Fashion Revolution, Fordham University, the United Nations Association of New York. In thinking about the sponsorship of this event, I think it reminds us of two very important values, two very important things as we go forward. One is the importance of unity. We are all in this together. And also, of course, knowledge is power. I've been in like I said, the civil society, social enterprise space, sustainable fashion space for a long time. And we hear a lot about how the importance of global change, worldwide change, and that can be a bit daunting. But as we've seen today, small changes can make a big difference. Understanding who makes your clothes, understanding about the supply chain, researching your brands. These are all important ways that you can have an impact on fashion, the environment, social conditions worldwide. So for my last thanks, I want to thank all of you for joining us, because I really do look forward to seeing the future that you're going to create.